Hello and most welcome to 1079 here. See if we can set up the system a little bit easier here. Still recording, yes. Thank God for the microphone. See, now you can hear me again, I can imagine. So, what does this quantum mechanical insights from science led us to, and what can we discern within our academic stature? Well, we saw a big change in the last but penultimate century from now, the 19th century, where a huge change within academia took place, a restructuring and ordering of all things according to a sort of technological model, where it was assumed there be an outer world and that all perceptions of that outer world were clear, decisive, non-disputable, and they were shared among anyone who had those experiences. Previously, articles, papers, exams were not so filled about reference, but there is an interesting change taking place in the 19th century, and it's that all of a sudden, instead of being skillful, knowledgeable, it's starting to be assumed that the knowledge is a storage, and that you need to sort of refer to this knowledge, and this is the start of the reference. In the beginning, it was as a mark of something bad if you have a huge reference list at the end of an article, but it turned out, or it seemed to be more and more the case, that more and more references were being made as for, to some aspect, trying to imitate what they thought were technological knowledge. The references they made in the end were their facts, they were their objects, were their things. So their ersatz, or proxy for having things, were all the references. So, and this is very clearly an imitation, and it's also noted in special places. I do not remember where I read it, but I remember one writer wrote that this is not writing, this is just reference. This is referring to someone else. This is not creative, individualistic, monistic, wholesome writing. It's a list of references. But this is obviously a way of trying to copy what was assumed to be technological knowledge. If you were to read a technological paper, you would not see many references at all. Would be very few. Could be some, but still be very few. And I would say tops 2 or 3, and would be absolute maximum that could be accepted. What you do instead, you do in the writing, you do the thing that you're supposed to present. You do it yourself, not by referencing to anyone else, or making a collection of references that some other people have made. Could be specific causes for that, as for instance Ian McIlcre's wanting to start up a new subject. He needs to dismantle the old subjects to make a firm foundation. But if you do it within the sciences already established, I don't see any point of it. And I see in articles where there's so many references nowadays, trying to make it more true, valid, having the facts correct. That is assuming, as I was pointing to in the previous lecture, the idea that everybody sees the same thing. We take away all obstacles, like perspective, different eyesights and all, lack of clearance and not being sober enough, all those things. We take away all those things. According to physics, according to what we have realized, two people will not see the same thing. It doesn't have to do with perspective, it doesn't have to do anything with subjectivity or objectivity. This is just how the world is. It is not monosemic, so to speak. Doesn't matter if you want to make it that way, the world will not yield, it will still be the same. And I think this has been building up weaker papers, weaker articles, weaker accents, at least the last century, if not longer. And it was considered to be a state of weakness. It's like having a painting and next to it you have a long list of reasons why that painting is good, arguments or references from other people who made similar paintings, or from the one who produced the powder for the paints, or for the oil that you used, or the canvas that has been put in use. The different brushes were made in China, Japan, or some other place. Some sort of original photo of the ferret that life was taken in order to make a brush. Biologist signing, this is the actual brush, this is the original brush from that original ferret, and he actually did exist sometime. And all this is infused with an idea of uncertainty, insecurity, I would say. And the more references you make, and those also go into the very paper, the weaker the argument becomes. The more dependent on something that is not present, constantly non-present thing is going to take the lead role, and it's going to make devalue the value of what you're writing. And it will also, I think this is maybe the most interesting Pauli effect, and that is that if you defer your energy to something else, you will also weaken your result. What looks like a very active hand is actually a very lazy brain or a lazy mind. Instead of thinking originally, new, creative, you put a lot of effort to putting together a reference list, to proving your point with other stuff, as to sort of copy-paste what technology does, because you think technology today, which is actually classical physics, provides a list of proofs of how things are. I would say that was not the case previously. You wrote something, it was thought up by you single-handedly, not made by somebody else. That was your original thought. Could get inspired by someone, but that someone was more, in that case, not a reference. It was more your master. For instance, a Schelling being the student of Schopenhauer and so forth. Fichte being inspiration for Heidegger. You don't have to refer, you take his knowledge to yourself. And this is knowing. This is a knowing that doesn't have a base. It doesn't have, as I usually pinpoint to, an epistemology, a true origin of that knowing. It is exactly this very knowing, a true origin, a true original, that is questioned by Wigner's friend, and even so more by the Renato Rauschinger experiment. This is not how the world works. It has never worked that way, but starting in the mid-19th century, all scholarly subjects, bar none, started to move in that direction and changing their inner life completely. I think things like literature were the last ones to change. When I was studying Japanese, still in my D essay, I was not supposed to leave any references to make it truer somehow by adding supplements from a wholeness that is already containing everything, perfect in itself. It doesn't need an addendum, it doesn't need an amplifier like these buildings standing tall since centuries do not need to have support. They are in themselves quite sufficient to support themselves. A general tendency here that could be pinpointed is that we started at that period generally on a general basis in society to think knowledge as something that is out there, information of the reality. We forget that there has to be an observer, a subject, and all of a sudden that information is just out there, living its own life and being shared by everyone. And when anything that's shared by anyone is shared by no one, not even the observer. So you see, the findings from quantum mechanics are a teller to all the other subjects. Get out of your copy-paste, your admiration for classical physics. It doesn't say there is another way to do those things. Go back to yourself. Go back to knowledge as having no origin. I don't think there is a wonder that so many sciences today or levels of knowledge are constantly looking for true origins everywhere. The true origin from where everything was originally taken from. This, true that. Quantum mechanics is questioning that and showing going too far in that direction will take away all truth, because the wholeness is already always present. Everything is there. Easing to the subject. Let the subject be there. This might be why I am now tending to like cubism, because it says that it is the subject with the subject's expectations, no matter what they are. It's the subject's wishes, his or her previous histories, what he or she is as a person, that decides what is going to be presencing. Not subjectively seeing something, but being part. That's a world in making, and that means if you ease into that and relax your system, let those things come into action, you will be presencing and you will entering into the thea, the aletheia, and you will not have this idea of an imminent, strong light that covers everything. The light above that's supposed to make everything more light. Maybe this is also the reason why we today in so many study halls have so much light, as to make the truth even clearer. But as it seems, as I told you before, overexposures burn out all feature of reality. When it gets too light, too clear, too warm, everything disappears. There are no more contours, there are no more dividing lines, there are no more limits then. It becomes less. Let me give you some more examples here. But do look out for this adding. It is like saying, I think the following, and then you add the reason for I think the following is the following. And then you put 1, and you put 2, you put 3, you put 4. Yes, I know this is exactly how I arranged my lectures. It's true. I do see how this could be turned against me, and it should be, because I'm trying to pave up a new road here somehow. But there is no way going about that than the conventional. This is why there is something good to what Emil Chris, Jacques Derrida, Martin Heidegger, and of course, not to be forgotten, dear old Ludwig Wittgenstein have been doing. Now let me give me an example here. Those things can be seen just from space, can be seen from time, can be seen from knowledge. And they have similarities, they also have differences. In space, I've been mentioning earlier on level 1, there you have opaque region and surfaces being revealed as largely space, revealed with a different focal setting, and we can say that our world order constitutes a particular focal setting of great space. Space level 1 is precisely our ordinary realm, seen in the light of further possibilities for human fulfillment. In such a perspective, all observations are considered to be function or an output of a local limitation of great space. That is to say, this is the idea, or the gestalt, that we experience reality, and that experience is very similar to all human beings. And that is a true experience, and those true experiences make up reality. So if I experience something true, I don't affect the thing, I'm not participating in the thing, I have nothing to do there, I just happen to be there. My reality is an incident. It is a bit unnecessary, as Carl Sagan would say, because I'm just an ant. You see how all this sort of abstract knowing at the same time as it seems to be defending knowledge, but I would say it's actually attacking it. And this is an opposite move from the move Paul de Man made within the fascist circus of his Belgian right-wing party, where he undermined the right-wing party by being too proven, too firm, too factic, too true, so to speak, in a very limited sense. Here is Carl Sagan trying to defend human knowledge, but looking at it at a deeper level, deconstructing it, so to speak. What he does is actually taking away knowledge, taking away the observer to too high a degree actually becomes obviously counterproductive. And I would say it's always counterproductive, but it is maybe not always that obvious. So better to see that smaller space, the idea of a subject in front of object in space, it's a sort of limitation, and that makes for a classical physical true experience, an original experience that I can keep in my head, so to speak. It's very funny instead. It should be duly noted that even this new perspective, with its envisaged possibility of a great space, is also subject to such a local limitation, and thus valid only as a working hypothesis or a transition phase view. With this qualification in mind, it can then be considered of vital importance for us to know that everything that is, in any sense, part of our experience realm is pervaded with great space dimension. Essential comments on the nature of great space, insofar as this can be communicated on this first level, include: great space is not a thing and cannot be said to exist. Ordinary space is a derivative but distorted expression of great space, and that could be parallel to saying that classical physics comes from quantum physics, just as in the case of the Wheeler-de Witt equation, where space and time are derivative, härledda, so to speak in Swedish, derivative from the occasion, what's happening. Whereas in classical physics they go about in just the opposite way and making a model of everything. Model with a U. Model. Great space is also Stephen Wolfram's conclusion and deduction that space is all we need, and if we start with objects we cannot reach all the details in space. And starting with objects is the wrong way of going about things. Starting with objects is obviously starting with an idea that the subject doesn't take any place. And what is the remnants of the subject? It is, of course, objects. And Wolfram calls this the openness for things to presence. Great space is the open, accommodating dimension that permits activity, happening and existing. Small focal setting views of what is required for existence and for event occurrences cannot encompass the great space dimension and are inherently incomplete. And this is what I want to say earlier on when I said if you start adding, supplementing to your thinking, to what you're saying, to what you're doing, you are undermining. You're trying to define what you're trying to say with what is not present. For instance, the references. They are bound to be non-present. You're weakening the build-up of everything you are saying. You are thereby weakening yourself. Great space is not spatially distributed over any region. It has no extensive dimension. While all familiar things are separate and distributed over ordinary space, delineated partly by differences in position, they are intimately connected insofar as the great space dimension is considered. distance between become meaningless. As I mentioned before, speak about nearness in Heidegger, which is a very good point to understand this subject much better. Loosen up distance, see distance as this stale thing that doesn't really have anything to do with reality. And I think Ian McKilker said that 15% of the population can see distances. They are so shut out from their inner dimension, so their outer reality becomes this representation, this unreality where distances are replacing nearness. So everything is distance. And this is also true in another way. It is distance in that practice you're no longer in space. You feel distance towards yourself, and in a life you can no longer read off or understand, and you also distance to your outer reality as something you only see as distances in between. Think about the reality of a schizophrenic. For him, the whole of reality is just objects situated with different distances to each other, like being inside a TV game. That is rather scary. Each finite and opaque region of our realm is virtually infinite in its great space aspect. The fact that one thing is doesn't not exhaust or obstruct the possibility of other things being there. The notions of standard regions is inapplicable, but in a sense any finite point has infinite space there. In the light of the above observations, nothing has been set up in only one way. This is important. There is a third trait that schizophrenic has about the world. It's unchangeable. It has to be the way it looks like. So just how the schizophrenic happen to see the world with its distances, with its objects, with its scale colors, and with its overexposure, which you can be pretty sure he or she has, it also had the feature of it has to be that way. This is the fact. Now think of the Greek word pragmata, which has an ancient history. It means reality as well as something being out there. And it's maybe a fair bet to say that this is how it started once upon a time. That instead of saying that reality is something inner/outer, it is just outer, and it's constantly shared by everyone. Go on to level 2. Now it might be more interesting. This is not a specific place or realm, but rather the result of making experiential progress in meeting the strategic challenge posed by the aspect of space level 1. That is, to the extent that we learn to open the focal setting and thus more closely approach great space, we are living in a second level relationship to great space. This relationship can manifest in infinitely many ways. Typical examples include an increase in personal freedom, less psychological pressure, greater physical relaxation, a heightening of the senses, and even parapsychological capacities such as telepathy and clairvoyance, something that was pointed out by, for instance, Erwin Schrödinger. Well, obviously quantum mechanics is clairvoyance. Spooky action at a distance is clairvoyance or telepathy. Still, high degrees of openness can result in a wide range of discoveries. But on this second level, the openness of great space and the relaxation of felt restrictions is still subject to subtle, self-centered or standard world order interpretation. So the freedom of great space is still appropriated to our limiting convenience. Space level 3. Here the picture of levels breaks down. This amounts to saying that the strategy of opening the focal setting lapses. There are no lower spaces. It is impossible at first for us to comprehend great space without relating it to what we know, to our ways of knowing and to our pragmatic schemes. Hence the focal setting approach is evoked to permit grey space to be located in some understandable relation to ordinary experience. But finally it becomes clear that great space is not higher than something else, and that the great space experience is the same as the narrow setting experience. Though it is possible for us to realize that great space is not simply a greater space, this realization depends on thoroughly following the 1, 2, 3 path ourselves. The issue is simply to learn to appreciate what is here, ordinary, and the path to this appreciation seems to require these transitional perspectives. Although level 3 is not a place unto itself, it involves a shift in perspective that has vast lived significance. At this level we can completely transcend a self-centered orientation and become fully with everyone and everything else. Locations and attitude, problem and confusions no longer bind us. They are seen as a beautiful play of great space, without great space being viewed as an external creator of the play. Life and death also provide an interesting play without binding our possibilities in any way. We have no improvement orientation, yet are fully available to help other people or to improve things by phrasing and exemplifying our appreciation of perfection in terms of others' improvement-oriented views. I think it would be interesting here to, I've been looking all over the place, can we find somebody who'd been thinking in the lines of, could be that Martin Heidegger is a good proponent to have his knowledge cast in quantum phenomenological terms. There is an author called François-Igor Pris, and he written an article called Heidegger's Quantum Phenomenology. It's the first find I've found so far, as seeing how the world really works and start that way instead of trying to constrain our thinking, our reality with the partly wrong model of representationalism or classical worldview, which I think put a strain on our thinking. Read from the abstract from François-Igor Pris. The article suggests that quantum mechanics is a science of a new type, which refutes the classical metaphysical concept of reality. The notion of quantum concept is introduced. The possibility of Wittgensteinian dissolution of the measurement problem with the help of the notion of the language game, and the possibility of a metaphysical solution of this problem with the help of Heideggerian notion of Dasein are considered. Some philosophers think that the measurement problem is the principal philosophical problem of quantum mechanics. This problem has been widely discussed in the literature since the creation of quantum mechanics. Many different solutions to the problem have been proposed. Until now, though, no consensus has been reached. In this paper I provide some reasons supporting the claim that Heidegger's philosophy contains resources that allow one to better understand the measurement problem and to come closer to its solution, if not to solve it. Moreover, in a sense, Heidegger's phenomenology is the appropriate philosophy for the understanding of non-classical physics in general. The quantum theory is considered as a non-classical theory, that is, as a theory of principally new type, while the Einstein theory of relativity, despite its revolutionary character, is considered a classical theory. What is the difference between classical and non-classical physics? Well, let us adopt the realistic point of view and suppose that science investigates reality. Then the border between classical science and non-classical science can be drawn in accordance with the concept of reality which is being used. Any concept of reality supposes its objectivity, that is, the independence of what is real from the subject. This is very important. But this independence can be understood differently. The concept of reality, which is implicit or explicit in classical physics, is what philosophers call metaphysical realism. According to this concept, reality of things, facts, and phenomena does not depend on the subject in a certain absolute sense. It can be completely detached from the subject and opposed to her as an exterior world. The subject scientist learns about this reality by means of a theoretical, mathematical representation. She is situated, so to say, face to face with the reality and theoretically represents or reflects it. The concepts being used are those of the classical type. Nota bene, very important. François-Igor has a point there, in the sense that the result of the application is always predetermined. For instance, the use of the classical concepts of coordinates and momentum allows one to determine the coordinates and momentum of a particle, which have definite values even when the concepts of coordinates and momentum have not been used. This is this weird, eerie thing, that the momentum and the coordinates are always there, although they're not being used. The idea behind metaphysical realism is that we can conceive of the entities and substances and species of the external world independently of any empirical beliefs and theories we hold or might hold in the future. According to the French philosopher phenomenologist Jocelyn Benoist, the classical metaphysical realism is characterized by two traits. One, there is an important sense, an objective reality which is independent from the subject. Two, this objective reality is the reality of objects situated in front of the subject. Benoist keeps one but rejects two. For him, the genuine reality is the reality of interaction between subject and the world. Heisenberg distinguishes between dogmatic realism, which according to him is the point of view of classical physics, metaphysical realism, and practical realism. The latter is the natural realism of science. The dogmatic realism claims that all meaningful information about the material world can be made objective. The metaphysical realism is the dogmatic realism together with the claim that things really do exist. The notion of the metaphysical realism, according to Heisenberg, is thus the traditional notion of metaphysical realism, condition 1 and 2 above. Heisenberg writes that Einstein criticized quantum mechanics from the point of view of dogmatic realism. In reality, however, Einstein's position is much more nuanced. For instance, he writes, "Physics is an attempt to conceptually grasp reality as it is, though independently of its being observed. This corresponds only to the condition 1 above. The metaphysical realism leads to the difficulties in interpretation of quantum mechanics, which can be dissolved if one replaces it by a non-traditional form of realism. Although within quantum mechanics the notions of subject and object are meaningful, the ultimate quantum mechanical reality is that of the process of measurement, in which the subject interacts with the object, and in this interaction it is as though both become dissolved, inseparable from each other. Before the measurement, it makes sense to talk about the quantum system situated in a state, for example in a state of superposition of eigenstates of a physical quantity. This is also called a Hermitian operator, if that helps. And also about the subject or observer, which is independent of the quantum system and does not interact with it. After the measurement, there is also an independent subject observer, and the quantum system which is independent of the subject and which is situated in one of the eigenstates of the measured physical quantity. After the act of measurement, the physical quantity has a definite value. The result of the measurement is reproducible. But in the process of measurement, when the probabilistic reduction of the wave function takes place, it makes no sense to talk about the subject as such and the object as such. The process of measurement, the reduction of wave function, cannot be called physical process in the usual sense. It is unobservable and cannot be mathematized, even in principle. The Born rules determine the probability of transition from a superposition state into one of the eigenstates of a physical quantity, i.e. the probabilities of obtaining a definite result of measurement only establish a correspondence between the initial situation and the final situation, and does not say anything about the process of transition itself. And now I have to go with saying that eigenstate fits really well with Dasein. It could be the best explanation of Dasein I heard so far. It becomes clearly now, and here is no risk of confounding Dasein with the subject or the object, or the relation between the object and the subject and the object, or anything of those limitations. Here we can say that the Dasein is the eigenstate. Excellent. Very elegant. The principal hypothesis of this paper, in favor of which some arguments are given below, is that it has a phenomenological nature in the sense of the Heideggerian Dasein. Quantum theory can be used as an instrument for preparing a given experimental situation. It seems that this demands more reflection on the foundation of this theory and the nature of reality than in the case of classical physics. But instrumentalism without phenomenology is not an appropriate philosophy of quantum physics. Why don't you try to see the laboratory plus the observer as a Dasein? That does make some sense, actually. The result of the application of quantum concept, for example the concepts of coordinates and momentum of a particle, is not predetermined. It is false or even meaningless to speak about the simultaneous existence of definite values of position and momentum of a particle, or about the existence of a well-defined trajectory of a quantum particle. Quantum concepts are rules, operators for the obtaining definite values. A definite value appears only as the result of an application of a quantum concept, that is, as the result of a measurement. For example, if the momentum of a free particle has a definite value, its position is absolutely undetermined. In this case, the result of application of the concept of a coordinate is absolutely undetermined, though quantum probabilities are determined. The coordinate with equal probability can take any value. A definite value appears only as the result of a process of measurements of the coordinate. Classical commutative physical quantities represent some real numbers. This cannot be said about the corresponding quantum operators. For a given quantum state, they represent matrices, sets of possible values of physical quantities, together with the corresponding probabilities. The actualization of a given definite value happens during the process of measurement. One can say that a quantum concept of physical quantities represents some quantum physical quantities, properties, which should be understood as dispositional ones. There is no analog of this type of presentation in classical mechanics. A quantum state is not to be interpreted as a la classical mechanics, as an assignment of actually possessed properties and their values, but rather as a mere assignment of probabilities. Although before the measurement of the position of the electron does not have any definite position, one cannot say that it does not have any position at all. The position of the electron giving its wavefront is a real dispositional property, which is described by the operator of its position. This is why Heisenberg, the atoms or the elementary particle, form a world of potentialities or possibilities rather than the one of things or facts. I think the last site is just brilliant. We're not living in a world of facts or objects. We're living in a world of potentialities. I would call it also possibilities. And this is why time and space are not in the Wien-Divitti equation. They come later. And if they are not allowed to come later, they are not able to shine forth. They become stale. They become deadened. Becomes this deadened space of the schizophrenic with distances, and wherein no knowledge can be had without constructing it, saying, this is my truth, and it's referring to this, and this is showing the truth, molding it up once more without having contact directly to reality. And this is very problematic because it makes all truth dependent. It makes it to, in the end, become a trace, I would say. And the overturn will happen because this has always already happened. And it means that truth will be a supplement to untruth. And this is the state of the art now within modern education. I say thank you very much. It was the first little take on trying to compare Heidegger to quantum mechanics. I wish you a very happy afternoon and see you soon again. Bye bye for now.